So for those of you who are new to Heart of the City, I'm Katie and I'm the Programmes Coordinator. Heart of the City is a not-for-profit based in the City of London. We work with small businesses and organisations with less than 250 employees across the UK and from different industries on their responsible business journeys. We have 2 courses available and both of these are there to help your business become more sustainable. We also have a free climate action toolkit and responsible business resource hub on our website. Next slide, please. The first of our courses available is Climate for SMEs, 4 Steps to Action. The climate crisis can be daunting for SMEs who don't have big teams and budgets to set net zero targets and work out how to get there. We know that from working with SMEs on responsible business for the past 20 years. And we also know how small businesses can have a great impact no matter how small their teams are. That's why we've created this course bespoke for SMEs to make taking action against the climate crisis accessible and achievable. Over 4 modules, you'll cover jargon busting and demystification, building the business case, measuring your carbon footprint, and creating a net zero action plan. We have 3 places available on this course if you're an SME based in or with more than 50% of your operations in the square mile, or if you're an SME supplier or tenant of the City of London Corporation. Next slide, please. Our second programme is Foundations for Responsible Business. This course is designed for small businesses and welcomes businesses with little or no experience in responsible business from all industries. The course supports SMEs to develop a responsible business approach focused in 3 areas. These are environment, people, and community. This takes place through workshops, surgery sessions, online resources, in-person networking, and one-to-one support with a programme manager. You can also book insight sessions with experts on particular responsible business topics. For ethnic minority-owned businesses based in London, we do have funded spaces available as part of the Minority Business Matters programme. All the details about our programmes are on our website, and we are here to help you if you have any questions. Great, next slide, please. Perfect. I'm now going to provide a brief introduction to the topic of nature and why it is important to you and your business. It may feel like a big and daunting topic, but we wanted to introduce it to you today as it's increasingly important for businesses to consider how they can prevent biodiversity loss and protect nature. We hope you leave the session with practical actions rather than feeling overwhelmed. Nature is intrinsically linked to businesses and communities prospering. Over 50% of global GDP is dependent on materials and services delivered by natural ecosystems. Already, the decline in the functionality of nature is costing the global economy $5 trillion per year. The benefits we receive from nature are known as ecosystem services. These are essential for human well-being and include providing clean air and water and regulating the climate. Businesses rely on nature for resources such as food, minerals, and building materials. And let's not forget healthy and prosperous employees and customers. Ecosystem services rely on healthy biodiversity. Biodiversity is the variety of living species, such as plants, animals, and bacteria in a given area. As biodiversity declines, ecosystems break down and lose their ability to deliver their services. Across the globe, biodiversity has been rapidly decreasing due to human activity. So the loss of biodiversity is not only an environmental issue, but a social and economic one. Businesses can engage with a range of activities that benefit nature. These include both reducing the company's negative impact on nature and investing in protecting and restoring nature. This can be done by taking on specific projects within the business, such as saving energy and reducing waste, and engaging with employees about nature. Businesses can also positively impact nature through their supply chains by reviewing purchasing habits. For example, for products and packaging, choose materials that can be recycled or are compostable. You have power in your buying habits and can show your support for nature and biodiversity through choosing suppliers that are more sustainable. Right, I'm now going to hand over to Ellen Shaddock from AXA XL, who are one of our ambassador companies that support the delivery of our programmes. Ellen is going to provide a deeper dive on how to integrate nature into your business operations. Ellen, over to you.
Thanks so much, Katie. Hi all, thanks for having me. So yeah, I'm Ellen. I am a sustainability project manager at AXA XL. I've been with the company for about 7 years now and working across environmental projects as well as philanthropic. So things like our carbon reporting, as well as some of our employee volunteering and charitable giving. And for the last few years, I've really been talking about the importance of water. So I have squeezed quite a lot of content into my presentation today. So apologies if I rush through anything, but there is time for questions at the end. So let me know if there's anything that isn't clear. Just to take 1 minute on AXA XL, we are the commercial insurance division of AXA Group. So we generally insure property or do casualty insurance for large corporates. We also do some specialty insurance, things like art or shipping, events, things like that. So yeah, slightly different to your kind of normal home and car insurance organization. If you go to the next slide, please, Maria, I will just give you a brief overview of our sustainability strategy, which we launched at the start of last year. So we have 3 pillars, and they focus on protecting natural ecosystems, and I'll talk to you a bit more about that one in a second, addressing climate change, and then embedding sustainable practices or kind of ESG, environmental social governance topics into our operations. So in terms of nature, we're thinking about building resilient ecosystems, protecting the planet for us and our clients. And again, I'll go through some of our goals shortly. In terms of addressing climate change, we're looking at our own business operations as a starting point. How can we reduce our own carbon footprint? But also, how can we offer more insurance products or services that make our clients more sustainable in the way that they do business as well? And then lastly, integrating ESG is really about thinking about how we can bring those environmental, social, and governance topics into everything we do as a business. Can we train our colleagues more on what we mean by climate change? Can we support our suppliers to address the kind of environmental footprint of their work? Can we think about the governance processes, the kind of structure that we have in the business to ensure that we're hearing from the right experts and, you know, consulting with the right organizations before we make any decisions? So we have 23 goals in this strategy, and you can find them on axaxl.com/sustainability. I'm not going to go through them now, but I will talk you through our nature ones shortly. On the next slide, Katie's covered some of this, but I just wanted to highlight why we're focusing on nature and the importance for us and society. So I think Katie did a great job talking about the kind of bigger picture, why there's that recognition globally. And I just wanted to point out on that GDP stat, I think it's really interesting to think about what that actually means when we say that GDP is dependent on nature. So essentially, many industries really rely on either the direct extraction of natural resources, maybe from forests or oceans, or the role of nature for the provision of those ecosystem services that Katie was talking about in terms of nature providing healthy soils, nature providing clean water or pollination or a climate that allows us all to live. So if we're thinking about specific industries, for example, construction is a really obvious one in terms of its reliance on forests for timber for that construction process. So that is one kind of dependency on nature for the construction industry. We've talked a bit about the connection between nature and climate change. Nature has a really important role in sequestering carbon. So the forests and oceans being able to absorb carbon emissions, but those environments are being put under increasing pressure from climate change, but also from land use change. The more we see these climate change impacts and the land use impacts affecting those carbon sinks, those forests and oceans, the less work they can do for us to help reduce the carbon emissions that we're putting into the atmosphere. And then the other piece I just wanted to point to here was around nature providing resilience benefits. This is something we're really interested in as an insurance company. How can we be more resilient to disasters, for example? And we've done some work over the last sort of 5 years or so with the Nature Conservancy. who found that mangroves provide significant resilience benefits to the communities that live behind them. So having a mangrove in place, if there's a flood or a storm surge, that mangrove will absorb some of that additional water or kind of pollution that comes through from that flood event and stop it reaching the communities that live behind them. And then mangroves obviously have they're a great habitat to encourage biodiversity, but they also have carbon sequestration benefits as well. So we've talked about the value of nature. I've talked a little bit about industry, and just to kind of highlight there that there's real risk of business disruption if we don't think about where we're reliant on nature, and if there are impacts on nature, how that might disrupt business processes. And I just wanted to do, one quick highlight of the kind of broader political, business, societal kind of angles for this. So in 2021, the Conference of the Parties 15, so the Biodiversity COP, governments got together and set targets for the conservation and restoration of nature. So we're seeing that kind of governments are paying attention to nature more. We're seeing businesses being asked to take more responsibility on nature as well. This usually comes from investors, but it does sort of trickle down to businesses of all sizes. So the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures framework is a globally recognized framework that companies can use to report on their kind of nature impacts and dependencies. And it asks companies to look at their strategy, their governance, their risk management, and also any targets or disclosures that they might set around nature. And you might have heard of the climate equivalent as well. So that's the TCFD, Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. These are really the best practice kind of standards for companies, but even without those, companies are expected to start to talk about some of these more and more, some of these topics, even if it's not at that level. And then we've probably all seen protests around fossil fuels and climate change, but I do think there are nature-related protests as well. Maybe they haven't been in the news quite so much recently, but around deforestation or pollution, for example. So just to bring this back to AXA XL, for us as an insurer, we really want to help our clients understand these risks. It's our role to kind of educate on new and complex risks. And if we can help clients prepare for and kind of mitigate some of these challenges, they're going to be more resilient, which goes back to our strategy name. We really believe that if you can consider sustainability topics in your business planning, that's at the kind of root of a more resilient business. So that's where our strategy name comes from. So if we can go on to the next slide, you'll see our 8 nature-related goals. These are set for us to deliver by 2026. The one that I'm going to talk a bit more about today is understanding our impact. That first goal, that's around a nature baseline exercise that we've been doing. And the results of that baseline are really going to influence how we achieve some of the other goals on this slide. So depending on the kind of sectors that come out of this baseline, that might impact which clients we target to better educate on some of these nature risks. Or maybe when we do this industry-wide collective action, we're looking at what topics will be most relevant based on this kind of baseline exercise that we've been doing. So some of these we won't have quite started yet, but some of the ones we have on this nature baseline that I'll talk in a minute, but also backyard biodiversity and the reforestation goals, they're really about how we work with nonprofits to protect, restore, conserve, kind of educate on nature for our colleagues and beyond. So maybe if we get some time at the end, I can tell you a little bit more about backyard biodiversity as well. So nature baseline, if we can go to the next slide, please, Maria, I will just talk you through what we mean by that. So those reporting frameworks that I mentioned before, TNFD, they really state that the first step to, kind of addressing nature in your business is to do an assessment about where you see those touch points with nature. And that's also something that comes through in the Science-Based Targets for Nature initiative. So another kind of framework that exists globally for corporates to think about how they touch on nature. And it was really about how yeah, it was really about how the different industries that we insure have nature-related impacts and dependencies. So, as I said, our different insurance products, property, casualty, marine, we touch a lot of different sectors. And so what we did was we worked with a consultancy to understand what the top nature impacts and dependencies were for different sectors. Now, some of this information is freely available publicly, and I'll talk a little bit more about it at the end. But there are two tools that we used. One is called Encore. Another one is the Science-Based Targets for Nature, SBTN, Sectoral Materiality Tool. Apologies, they're both a bit of a mouthful, but I do point to them at the end. And basically, both of them allow you to enter a sector that you work in or that maybe our clients work in, and it will highlight some of the key dependencies and impacts on nature. So that data is already available. For us, it was about working out where our insurance products touch those different sectors, how many different products we have in one sector, what percentage of our insurance premium goes to different sectors, things like that. So once we did that kind of research with the consultancy, we gave the different sectors a materiality grade from very low to very high based on that data, to kind of understand, right, which sectors should we prioritize. And we found that the majority of our insured sectors had moderate to very high impacts or dependencies on nature. So plenty of places for us to be taking some action. And in terms of the impacts on nature, both of those tools that I mentioned, there are 5 impacts that they consider. So land, water, and sea use change, climate change, pollution, natural resource use and exploitation, and invasive species. They're seen as the kind of 5 top impacts to nature that sectors can see. And for us, in our baseline, we found that pollution and land conversion were the top impacts across our portfolio. And then in terms of dependency, so we talked a little bit about dependencies before. We found that 40% of the dependencies across our portfolio were related to water. So that means things like sectors being reliant on groundwater supplies for their manufacturing processes, or maybe they are reliant on ecosystems acting as a kind of flood defense or a way of absorbing excess rainwater. But just to highlight a couple of other dependencies, I think we've talked about them before, but it could be that a property is relying on nature as a kind of sound or pollution barrier around it, or maybe agriculture, will be reliant on pollination as a way of supporting that crop growth. So they're the sort of ecosystem service dependencies that that you might see. So we're really quite early with our, early in the phase of our work on nature. And as I said, the results that we're finding from this baseline are going to influence how we address those other goals that you saw on the kind of roadmap slide. But what was really interesting for us was that water came through in that ecosystem service dependencies piece. And as I said at the start, we've been looking at water for the last kind of 3 years or so, mostly from a climate change lens. So when you think about the impacts of climate change, a lot of those are water related. It changes rainfall, it influences flood surges, the kind of natural catastrophes that we see changing in frequency or strength from climate change are often water related natural catastrophes, and they can also deteriorate water quality. So hurricanes, for example, might damage drainage systems, and you get pollution in your water supply, things like that. So we've come at water from a kind of climate angle so far, but actually I think there's more we can do to talk about the nature water connection as well as the climate water connection. So if we go to the next slide, I'll just give you a little bit of background on why we've been thinking about water. So as I said, this came up partly as a kind of underappreciated climate risk. It's one of the main ways we're going to see climate change impact us is through water, but it wasn't really being talked about. So we thought, right, what else can we do as a kind of expert on risk to talk more about this? And we spoke to some of our clients, some of our nonprofit partners. And we really felt there was a role for AXA XL to play to kind of increase education and awareness on this topic. So last year, we published our Water Risk Insights report, which is about improving understanding of water risks, but also giving organizations really clear actions that they can take on water. So there's 3 sections to the report, and I'll just talk through them briefly now. One is on the types of water risk, one is on how those water risks impact different sectors, and the last section is about the kind of tools and actions that businesses can take. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see what we mean by water risks. We think about them as physical, reputational, and regulatory risks. So physical risks are about how water might be used in your operations. And we generally summarize this one as having too much water, too little water, or water that's kind of inaccessible or unfit for use. And I think in terms of how businesses should think about this, just like when you're buying a house, you check whether you're looking to live on you're going to live on a floodplain. You should think about the same thing for your operations. Will your operations be in a flood-prone area? If you're dependent on water in your operations, is the water supply that you're reliant on consistent? Is it going to survive? Is it going to be available even in different kind of temperature and future climate scenarios? Reputational risks, these are about how customers or stakeholders think about a company's impact on water. And I think this is a really kind of interesting piece. It's often talked about less, but you can probably think about big organizations that are using large amounts of water, maybe drinks companies, for example. They've got manufacturing facilities in areas that are prone to water scarcity, and they're using large amounts of water, but the local people maybe can't access that water as well. But I think it's really interesting for smaller businesses to think about reputation as well, because with nature and water, when these risks materialize, when these events happen, the impacts are very local. The floods or the water pollution happen wherever you have been working. They're not in some faraway place. So yeah, I think that brings an interesting reputational angle to it, because your customers might be more local. They're more likely to see this kind of alleged poor management of water, for example, local to them. And then regulatory risks, they're about changes in regulation, as the name suggests. And we're not seeing a lot of these at the moment, but I think it's something that might come into play as we see more regions becoming water stressed. And it's maybe likely that heavy water users in those regions are penalized or treated differently in terms of how they can access and use water. There will be some interesting dynamics, I think, for water utilities companies in terms of how corporates in their region use water versus those household clients, households that need water to drink, to wash. How do we manage that kind of balance? So they're the 3 risk types. In the report itself, each risk has its own page, so you can find out a little bit more about what that means. And then in the next section of the report, so if we go to the next slide, thanks, Maria, we basically present each of these sectors. We look at those risks from the previous page and how they impact those different sectors. And we chose these sectors based on ones we knew had, sectors we knew had heavy water dependencies, but also were relevant to our business. And we spoke to nonprofits again, to nonprofits and NGOs about where we should focus this attention. And on the next slide, I just wanted to pull out one example so you could see what it looks like in the report. For each sector, you'll see a water risks matrix. So there's risks that I talked through, given a low, medium, or high ranking for that sector. And the reason I chose manufacturing is it's got a really interesting kind of dynamic in that it needs that consistent water supply, but there's also challenges around how it uses water, whether there are chemicals or maybe pollution in the water that it uses when that's sent back out into our pipes or maybe into rivers or natural water sources. Should they be, are they doing enough to consider how that pollution might affect those water supplies? And the other reason I chose this one is because it really has the ability to have knock-on effects to other industries. So you might not be a manufacturer, but you might rely on manufactured goods or services. It's important to think about how water might affect you through your kind of broader value chain. So that's the sectors section. And then on the next slide, you'll see a little bit about the actions you can take to address your water risks. So we wanted to make sure that the report was really clear in terms of, well, what can you do about it? So we suggest 5 different kind of solutions, and I'm not going to go through them all now, but I just wanted to start on this first one to say this footprinting piece is a little bit like the nature baseline that I talked about earlier. It's thinking about, where do your operations touch on water? And there's a great tool that's freely available online from WWF, the nonprofit, called their water risk filter. And you can put your operational locations in, whether that's an office or a kind of site or a factory, and it will tell you, is that area at risk of water stress, at risk of flooding, lots of different things, and you can kind of filter it by time and location as well. So for each of these solutions that we suggest, we really wanted to make sure that there was some tools or some direction available for corporates to take action on these. And you don't necessarily have to do all of these things. You might find from the footprinting that there's 1 or 2 areas to focus on, but we just wanted to give a kind of broad range of tactics, I suppose, to think about water risks. So if you go on to the next page, you'll see the link to this report. As I said, it has the 3 sections I talked about, explaining the water risks, how those risks impact different sectors, and then the actions that the organizations can take to address those risks. So that's a bit of background on our strategy, how we're thinking about nature, and what we've done so far on water as one element of a kind of nature climate risk that we've been focusing on. And as Katie said at the start, something she wanted this presentation to do was make sure there were kind of takeaway actions for everyone in terms of how they can think about nature. So on the next slide, I just wanted to highlight a couple of kind of starting points for where you can take action. So the first is that footprinting piece, or the baseline, whichever term you want to use. This will really help you identify where your operations impact or depend on nature. So as I said, that SBTN and the Encore tool are both free and available online. They look a little bit technical on first glance, but once you enter in your sector, it really becomes a lot more usable, and you can, get into the different ways that sector might impact or depend on nature, and you can think about whether that's in your operations or whether that's in terms of what the resources that you rely on. So they're really great resources that are available. And again, just to consider beyond just your operations, think about your suppliers and your products and services as well. The second point I would suggest is to influence or advocate for changes where you can. And I think Katie pointed to some of these suggestions at the start. Do you have a green space in your office that you can plant some wildflowers, maybe add a kind of bird table, support biodiversity in some small way? I think we found for our colleagues, they've really enjoyed seeing those changes in our offices. So we've tried to work with our facilities team to make some changes where we can. And it's a great way to get employees involved in it and really see it's a lot more visible, in terms of actions that you can take as a business. And then purchasing power. So can you choose suppliers that have thought about their environmental impact? Are they reducing waste? Are they thinking about making it more recyclable, compostable, as Katie mentioned? And again, in terms of colleagues, particularly, I think partnering or volunteering or donating to environmental organizations is really important. We often get asked by our employees, okay, but what can I do? How can I get involved? And we've tried to be a lot more deliberate that if we're doing any kind of charitable giving activity, or maybe we're organizing a volunteering activity, can we think about environmental organizations as well? So it could just be that it's, a group of people getting out to clean up a park, or maybe doing some kind of gardening to support a community organization. and that works really well locally. There's lots of opportunities available, and the costs are often quite minimal as well, but it's kind of double whammy of environmental benefits and good team building activities as well. And then lastly, I just wanted to highlight that actually you're probably already doing some things that are great for nature in your carbon reduction efforts. So saving water as a finite, natural resource that we need to think about using more carefully. Using less water also uses less energy. There's a lot of energy needed to treat wastewater and get it back into our pipes and into our homes. So saving water, not only good for the environment, but good for nature. Then I found this example recently really interesting when I was doing some other research. I think we probably all think about turning our lights off for reducing our electricity bills, to reduce our carbon emissions, but actually reducing light pollution can be really great for wildlife as well. So light pollution can disrupt kind of natural sleep cycles for animals. It can drive away animals from usable habitats and disrupt migration. So you turning the lights off will save you some money on electricity bills, but it will also have great nature benefits too. And then the last thing I wanted to say on this slide was this website, getnaturepositive.com. I found really helpful. We used it, as a bit of inspiration for some of our other work about how we can hopefully make the things that we deliver quite user-friendly and helpful. And it's a really great website in terms of explaining why nature, what you should think about, what's important, but letting you select your sector and then giving you sector specific suggestions. And they can be from kind of small things like, maybe saving water or reducing light pollution, things that you might already be considering, to bigger things that are more about how you change your practices as a business. So one of the examples is for architects to think about how they can make their building designs more nature friendly. How can they incorporate nature into their building design? So it can be a real spectrum of actions that you can take, and it's a great resource for that topic. So hopefully that has given you a whirlwind tour of our strategy, how we're thinking about nature, and what we've already done on water. I'm very happy to take any questions on what I've talked through today, but in the meantime, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Ellen. Yeah, Maria, I think you can go into the next slide. I think it just says Q&A in big bold letters. Yeah, there we go. So we have a few minutes now for Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, please put them in the Q&A section. While we wait for them to come in, Ellen, you mentioned backyard biodiversity at the start. Maybe could you kind of talk a bit about what that is while we see if questions come in?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and another colleague in our team actually launched that last year. So Backyard Biodiversity is a program we developed with a nonprofit partner called Pollinator Partnership. And it is about how colleagues can encourage and support biodiversity in their own homes or local to them. So we developed a toolkit with the charity, a couple of toolkits actually. So the first was around, what do we mean by pollinators? How can you make your garden more pollinator friendly? And I don't think I said at the start, but we're 10,000 employees across 30 countries. So biodiversity means something very different to all of those different locations. So we really wanted to make sure that the toolkit helped people with everything from a little window garden, maybe a balcony garden, to having a full, garden at the back of their house. So there was lots of information about how you can make a pollinator-friendly garden. There was a toolkit around how you can spot pollinators, what they look like, and also a toolkit for building bee houses, which we've all tried to do in our sustainability team and shared some photos. So it's a good fun activity for people to get involved with. So it's been a really great success. And I think colleagues have liked, as I said, having things that they can try at home that relate to our kind of broader strategy.
And how easy was it to kind of get people on board, your colleagues, to kind of take nature seriously? Was there any tips on how to kind of bump it up the agenda when there's kind of so many competing priorities right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have colleague-led green committees. So some colleagues already told us, I'm interested in this topic, how can I do more? So we set up these green committees with them, they lead them, and we just talk to them more often about these topics than we would our general colleague population. So that's one way that we just focus on those that we know are more interested. And then the other thing I would say is just making the opportunities varied. So backyard biodiversity, you could do as much or as little as you like. It could be as simple as taking some wildflower seeds, sprinkling them in your garden, and then that's it. You don't go any further. Or you could get your kids involved and start spotting different types of bees and butterflies in your garden and really kind of increasing your education and understanding of it.
Great. And then more externally, are you doing kind of anything to speak to your customers and kind of other businesses you work with around nature, or kind of doing anything to support them on this kind of nature journey?
Yeah, definitely. And we're quite early in that, as I said, because we're just understanding ourselves where we're seeing nature in our business. But in the water space, particularly, we've been talking to clients a lot. And I think we'll see the same in nature, I suspect. But some organizations are really leading on this. They've been thinking about water for a long time, or nature for a long time, because it's so integral to their business. So I'm thinking about food and beverage companies, for example. It's really obvious where nature intersects with their work. But other organizations are a bit further behind. So something we're trying to do is be that connecting point between those different actors. So can we provide education, case studies maybe from those leading actors that supports organizations that are just getting started. But yes, some of those other goals will be about, can we bring industries or sectors together to talk about this topic, learn from each other? Can we offer more kind of educational tools or resources? So the Water Risk Insights report was a big report we published last year, but are there other reports or research we can share that would help organizations as well?
And on the topic of water, you obviously mentioned like mangroves and flooding. Kind of how would you see, or how are we going to see nature and water risks more in the UK and kind of more locally to us?
Great question. Yeah. So I think that was an interesting one, because sometimes we think of climate and nature risks as being far away. I think we think, oh, it's not going to happen here. But actually, in the UK, especially the southeast, we've got a very large population and we are a water stressed region. It's going to be an increasing challenge, especially over the next kind of 10 to 20 years as weather patterns change and the groundwater supplies we have change. So we will see water becoming an increasing challenge in the UK. And I think it is being talked about more in the nature space as well. So we're starting to see more research from the UK government and others about how nature's being impacted in the UK. I think I've got a stat here that was the UK is now one of the most nature depleted countries on Earth, with about 1 in 6 of its wildlife species at risk of extinction. So there are challenges here in the UK. I know there's some new regulation coming through, particularly for construction and developers in the UK, about making sure that any building developments that they take on will result in either more or kind of better quality natural habitat than when they started that work. That's the biodiversity net gain regulation. So things like that will mean that here in the UK, we need to think about it more and make sure that it's considered in the way businesses work.
Great, thank you. That wraps all of our questions, apart from someone asking about the toolkits, sharing them, and yeah, we'll get them sent out in the post session email so you can access them there. Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Ellen.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining today's session. We're just now going to launch a poll to see how everyone found the session. So if you could answer that when it comes up, that'd be great. The question is, as a result of today's session, are you more confident in how your business can protect nature? While you answer that, I just want to remind you that information on our programs can be at Heart of the City can be found on our website. You can also book in a meeting with one of our programs team to find out more, and all this will be sent in the post-event email. If you have any other questions on the topic of nature or water and biodiversity, you can contact one of us at Heart City as well, and we can also get in touch with Ellen as well, kind of pass your questions on. When a decent number of people have answered, Maria can finish the poll. And kind of that brings the session to a close. So thank you for joining, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.